Ethan's eyes fluttered open as the first beams of morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting golden streaks across his bed. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep, and listened to the silence that filled the house. Normally, his mother, Jenna, would be awake by now. Ethan was so used to hearing the clatter of pans, the sizzle of eggs on the stove, and his mother humming along to some song on the radio while she prepared breakfast. But today, it was quiet, too quiet. Ethan sat up in bed, the soft sheets crumpling beneath him. The clock on the nightstand blinked 7:45 a.m. in bright red numbers. His mom should have been up long before now, getting ready for work, making sure he had his favorite cereal for breakfast before school. His 6-year-old mind tried to push away the unease that was creeping into his chest. Maybe she was just tired, he thought. She worked hard, sometimes staying up late finishing reports for her job or cleaning up after their apartment. But still, it was unusual. He climbed out of bed, his feet hitting the cold wooden floor. Ethan walked cautiously out of his room and down the short hallway of their modest apartment, the floor creaking under his weight. As he passed the small kitchen, his stomach growled in protest he hadn't had breakfast yet. And usually by now, he would have been stuffing his face with cereal while his mom reminded him not to talk with his mouth full. He poked his head into the kitchen, but it was dark and still. No breakfast on the table. No warm smell of toast or eggs, no sign of his mother. His heart beat a little faster as he turned toward his mom's bedroom, the door slightly ajar. Ethan pushed it open slowly, peeking in to see his mother still lying in bed. The blinds in her room were drawn, the space dim except for a sliver of light cutting through the gap in the curtains. She was still asleep. Ethan hesitated, standing in the doorway. Jenna never slept this late. She was always up before him, no matter how tired she was. He stepped closer, trying to catch a glimpse of her face in the dim light. The covers were pulled up to her chest, her hair a messy halo around her head on the pillow. "Mom," he called softly, but she didn't stir. He took another cautious step forward, now standing beside her bed, his stomach twisted uncomfortably. She looked different. Usually when she was asleep, her chest would rise and fall in a slow, peaceful rhythm. But now her breathing seemed shallow, barely noticeable, and her face it seemed unusually pale. "Mom," he said again, a little louder this time. Still, no response. Panic began to creep into his voice as he reached out a small hand and gently shook her shoulder. "Mom, wake up, please." His heart thudded in his chest as he shook her again, harder this time. But her body remained limp, unmoving. The unease that had been simmering in his chest was now a full-blown wave of fear. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat, and his hands started to tremble. He didn't know what was wrong. He didn't understand why she wouldn't wake up. But he knew something was very, very wrong. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to remember what his mom had told him about emergencies. They'd only talked about it once or twice, but her words echoed in his mind now like a distant memory. She had said that if something ever happened, something really bad, he should call 911. It was the only number he needed to remember if he needed help. His hands were trembling as he stood by the bedside, trying to decide what to do. He looked at his mom one more time, hoping, praying that she would just wake up, open her eyes, and tell him everything was fine. But she didn't. "I'll be right back," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. He turned and dashed out of the bedroom, his small feet pounding against the wooden floor as he ran toward the kitchen where the phone was hanging on the wall. He had to think hard to remember how to dial the number. His hands shook as he lifted the receiver and pressed the buttons with his trembling fingers. 911. It rang twice before a calm voice answered on the other end. 911. "What's your emergency?" Ethan hesitated, his voice catching in his throat. My mom won't wake up," he finally said, his voice cracking with fear. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then the operator's voice softened. "Okay, buddy, what's your name?" "Ethan," he whispered. "Ethan, where's your mom right now?" She's in bed. She's been asleep all morning, and she won't wake up. I tried to wake her up, but she won't. She won't open her eyes." The operator's tone was gentle but urgent. "Okay, Ethan, you did the right thing by calling. Is anyone else there with you?" Ethan shook his head, even though the operator couldn't see him. No, it's just me and my mom. All right, Ethan. I need you to stay on the line with me, okay? We're sending help right now. Can you tell me your address? Ethan rattled off the address as best as he could remember it, though his voice was shaky. The operator repeated it back to him, making sure it was correct, and then reassured him that help was on the way. You're doing great, Ethan. Just stay with me, okay? Is your mom still breathing? Ethan glanced back down the hallway toward his mother's bedroom. I think so. But it's really slow. The operator continued asking questions and Ethan answered them as best as he could. He stayed on the line, clutching the phone tightly to his ear, as he waited for the ambulance to arrive. Time seemed to drag on forever. He didn't know how long it had been, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, but it felt like an eternity. He kept peeking into his mother's room, hoping she would suddenly sit up, smile at him, and tell him everything was okay. But she didn't move. Finally, after what felt like hours, Ethan heard the distant sound of sirens. The wail of the ambulance grew louder as it approached the apartment building, and Ethan ran to the window to see the flashing lights. His heart raced with both fear and relief. Help was here. But then another problem hit him. How would they get inside? The front door was locked, and he was too small to reach the deadbolt. He ran back to the front door and tried to stretch up on his tiptoes, but no matter how much he tried, he couldn't reach the lock. The operator must have sensed his panic. "Ethan, are you okay?" the voice asked through the phone. "I can't open the door," Ethan cried, his voice thick with frustration. "I'm too short." "It's okay, Ethan. Stay calm. We'll figure it out. Just stay where you are, and the emergency team will help you. You're doing a great job." Ethan stood by the door, tears streaming down his cheeks as he listened to the sirens getting closer. A moment later, he heard loud footsteps running up the stairs, and a deep voice called from the other side of the door. "Ethan, it's the paramedics. Can you open the door for us?" I can't reach it," Ethan yelled back, his voice cracking. He looked around the apartment, searching for something he could use to help him reach the lock. His eyes fell on one of the kitchen chairs and he sprinted over to it. The chair was heavy, but Ethan was determined. He dragged it across the floor, the legs scraping loudly against the wood. He positioned it in front of the door and climbed onto it, wobbling a little as he stood up on his toes and reached for the lock. He still couldn't reach it. Frustration boiled up inside him as he strained, stretching his fingers as far as they would go. He was so close, just an inch away, but it wasn't enough. He let out a cry of frustration and banged his fist against the door, the tears spilling freely now. "Don't worry, Ethan," the paramedic's voice came through the door again. "We're going to get you and your mom out. Just hang on." Ethan jumped down from the chair, feeling defeated, and backed away as he heard a loud thud against the door. The paramedics were trying to break it down. Another thud followed, then another. The door shook violently with each blow, the hinges creaking under the pressure. Finally, with one last strike, the door burst open and the paramedics rushed in. Ethan stood frozen in place as they hurried past him, their faces grim with urgency. One of them knelt down beside him and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did great, Ethan," the paramedic said softly. "We're going to take care of your mom now, okay?" Ethan nodded, his eyes wide with fear as he watched them disappear into his mother's bedroom. He stood in the hallway, unable to move, as the paramedics worked. He could hear them talking in low, serious voices and the beeping of the machines they had brought with them. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours, and eventually the paramedics wheeled his mother out of the room on a stretcher. Ethan's heart clenched as he saw her pale face, her eyes still closed. He wanted to run to her, to hold her hand, to beg her to wake up, but he was too scared to move. They loaded her into the ambulance, and one of the paramedics turned to Ethan. "Come on, buddy. You're coming with us." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then nodded and climbed into the ambulance beside his mother. The doors closed behind him, and the siren wailed as they sped toward the hospital. The ride felt endless. Ethan sat beside his mother, clutching her hand, willing her to wake up. He didn't understand what had happened, why she wouldn't wake up, why she was so pale. All he knew was that he was terrified of losing her. At the hospital, they rushed her inside while Ethan was left in the waiting room with a nurse who tried to comfort him. He sat in a hard plastic chair, his legs swinging back and forth as he stared at the door his mother had disappeared through. Hours passed. Ethan's grandmother arrived, her face pale with worry as she hugged him tightly, telling him how brave he had been. But even her warm embrace couldn't chase away the fear that gnawed at his chest. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctor emerged. His expression was serious but not hopeless. "Your mom's going to be okay," Ethan, the doctor said gently. "She's very sick, but you saved her life by calling 911. If you hadn't called, things could have been much worse." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him, but his heart was still heavy with fear. Why? Why didn't she wake up? The doctor knelt down to his level and spoke in a calm, soothing voice. "Your mom was exposed to something called toxic mold. It's been growing in your apartment for a while, and it made her very sick. But now that we know what's wrong, we can help her get better." Toxic mold. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Ethan didn't fully understand what it meant, but he knew one thing: his home wasn't safe. The mold had been there all along, hidden behind the walls, poisoning the air they breathed. As the days went by, Jenna slowly recovered. The doctors treated her for the mold exposure, and little by little, her strength returned. She opened her eyes one morning, smiled at Ethan, and whispered, "Thank you for saving me." Ethan's chest swelled with pride, but the memory of that morning still haunted him. He couldn't shake the image of his mother lying still in bed, the fear that had gripped him when she wouldn't wake up. The apartment was condemned shortly after, the toxic mold too dangerous to live with. They moved to a new place, one that was clean and safe. But Ethan would never forget that day, the day he had been brave enough to save his mom's life. Years later, Ethan grew up to become a paramedic, inspired by the heroes who had come to his rescue. Every time he saved a life, he remembered that morning and the courage he had found when he was just a boy.